Shalom, giving all praises to the Heavenly Father, Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Rachahakodash. Double honors to the apostles, the bishops, and the elders at Great Millstone who rule well. Peace and salutations, as always, to the elect. We're going to get into Prophecy Watch as we look at the things happening right before our very eyes and tie them to the Holy Scriptures so that the faithful believers in Yahweh Bashim Yahushua can be comforted and have an understanding of the things that are happening right before their very eyes, according to the Holy Scriptures, as everything that is happening, all right before your very eyes is a result of biblical prophecy. Now, one of the main prophecies that we focus on, all right, is division, all right, in the EU, all right, the beast system, all right, which is the 10 horns, along with NATO, all right, led by Babylon the Great, the whore, okay? Now, this is all right, the revival of Rome, all right, which is ultimately how Esau, Edom, would play out his blessing of having the fatness of the earth, control of the resources, all right, by the sword, all right, which he was been blessed with a great military, in which he's used that blessing to go throughout the four corners of the earth, waging wars, destroying, rape, robbing, murdering. He sent economic hitmen all over the earth to corrupt leaders, and if they didn't comply, he put them to death and set up leaders that are after his own interest. All right, he has the whole world in a digital, all right, stronghold, debt, okay? And one of the things that prophecy focuses on is that, okay, in the end time, all right, as you can see here, European Union Foreign Policy Chief Joseph Borrell, the devil himself, admitted, all right, the West has hypocritical double standards on international law. The Russia-Ukraine NATO war, Israel's brutal bombing of Gaza, the U.S.-led invasion of Iraq, sea change, all right, you see what that says there, all right. Ben Norton analyzes the revealing comments of the EU diplomat. So one of the major prophecies that we focus on is that there will be division in the beast system as concerning, all right, Babylon the Great, all right, and we also know that Israel is going to be a part, all right, of that division as well, all right. So let's listen to this individual, as the EU vassals have aided Babylon the Great in the destruction of many strongholds. You know, a notable one, Libya, Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, and many other places, all right, that the EU has aided as, all right, when you read the scriptures, let's get that real quick. All right, the whore rides the scarlet colored beast. Okay. Let's see here. Let's get Revelation, the 17th chapter. Let's see here. Give me 1 second here. All right, Revelation 17:3. So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman, all right, which the woman represents Babylon the Great, that whore, sit upon a scarlet colored beast. Scarlet is a derivative of red. The red beast, full of names of blasphemy, and nothing but blasphemy and evil and wickedness has been spread from them system, all right, having 7 heads and 10 horns, okay, and that represents this beast system. But the woman sits, all right, upon the scarlet colored beast, all right. So America, all right, has set up on this beast system, and it's aided her in all of her atrocities, all right. And when you read these comments, all right, people are just cursing this man out, okay. This cursing these. Everybody knows that these people are the wicked and responsible for the many atrocities that are happening in the planet Earth. These devils. All right, so let's listen to them.
And for Europe, this is a problem. Wherever I go, I found myself confronted with the accusation of double standards. I used to say to my ambassadors that diplomacy is the art of managing double standards. Certainly something difficult, but it is about to manage double standards.
The European Union's foreign policy chief has admitted that Europe's policies are deeply hypocritical and are based on double standards. This was said by Josep Borrell, who is the EU's High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy. He was speaking at Oxford University, and he acknowledged that Europe is hypocritical and sometimes violates international law, and yet criticizes other countries for violating international law.
And they violate international law for the most part, all right, and it's aiding of Babylon the Great.
He acknowledged that this is a double standard, and he said that the art of diplomacy is the art of managing double standards. So he was admitting that Europe's foreign policy is based fundamentally on hypocrisy, and he in particular acknowledged the fact that numerous countries in Europe supported the illegal US-led invasion of Iraq, and he also acknowledged that Europe was supporting Israel in committing war crimes and crimes against humanity in Gaza, and yet Europe expected the world to support Ukraine, portraying Russia as an evil boogeyman. So here's this very revealing clip in which the top EU foreign policy official acknowledges their deep hypocrisy.
And the scriptures say that the joy of the hypocrite, let's get that real quick, okay? Because even him coming out saying this, he doesn't plan on changing anything. However, we are moving to a time, right, where these EU countries are, all right, going to ultimately turn on Babylon the Great. All right. This is the book of Job 20:5. It says, I start at 4. Knowest thou not this of old, since man was placed on the earth, that the triumphing of the wicked is short, and the joy of the hypocrite but for a moment? Though his excellency mount up to the heavens, and his head reach unto the clouds, yet he shall perish forever like his own dung. They which have seen him shall say, where is he? Okay. And this is ultimately Esau Edom, as it says here. His children shall seek to please the poor, and his hands shall restore their goods. His bones are full of the sins of his youth, which shall lie down with him in the dust. Okay. Though wickedness be sweet in his mouth, though he hide it under his tongue, though he spare it and forsake it not, but keep it still within his mouth. And this devil, he talks, with a forked tongue, as the so-called Native Americans, all right, said. He speaks with a forked tongue. He says one thing, but ultimately his actions lead to another. All right. But again, as the scriptures say, this very beast system, all right, on which the whore rode, okay, which has helped Babylon the Great, all right, commit all of this wickedness, all right, this very beast system, as we get to the end, Revelation 17:16, and 10 horns, all right, the vassal states, which is fulfilled in the EU, all right, which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh and burn her with fire. So these different countries are going to side with Russia. All right. We'll get into all of that. All right. But they're going to turn against the West. All right. Because they're going to catch hell because of the West, and they're going to be drawn into all kind of conflict to the point where they're all going to renege. All right. And Israel and the United States are going to be a target. All right. And then world war is going to break out. It says, for God hath put it in their hearts to fulfill his will, and to agree to give their kingdom unto the beast, for the purpose of Babylon the Great, unto the word of the Most High be fulfilled. And a woman which thou sawest is that great city, Babylon the Great, which reigneth over the kings of the earth. So you have this whore which rides this scarlet colored beast.
Enters international humanitarian law to try to regulate how wars are fought, and safeguard the protection of civilians. And this principle should be the best safeguards against the normalization of the use of force that we see all over the world. And I know, however, that to be able to rally the world around those principles, we need to show that we, Europeans, we respect them always and everywhere.
And they haven't. They've aided in genocide. Okay, but here he's acknowledging that he's acknowledging their offense, basically. All right, but ultimately he's blaming the West and Israel. All right, and saying basically the double standard. Just keep listening.
Is that what we are doing? Well, not to the extent we should. And for Europe, this is a problem. Wherever I go, I found myself confronted with the accusation of double standards. I used to say to my ambassadors that diplomacy is the art of managing double standards. Certainly something difficult, but it is about to manage double standards. But the fact is, people around the world have not forgotten the war in Iraq. Mm-hmm. Even if some European Union member states did not participate, others participated with a lot of enthusiasm.
And a lot of so-called innocent people, nobody perished as being innocent. But in the grand scheme of things, these people really, it was a false flag war, all right, rooted in, the stealing of resources. Okay? And he's admitting, all right, that they aided Babylon, all right, in raiding that place, right?
And others withdraw quickly of this war. This is the case of the country I know best. And what is now happening in Gaza has portrayed Europe in a way that many people simply don't understand. They saw our quick engagement and decisiveness in supporting Ukraine and wonder about the way we approach to what is happening in Palestine.
There you can hear that Borrell mentioned three different issues that the EU has been very hypocritical on: the Iraq war, Israel's brutal war crimes in Gaza, and the war in Ukraine. He then continued acknowledging that Western governments give the impression that Ukrainian lives are more valuable than Palestinian lives.
But the perception is that the value of civilian lives in Ukraine is not the same that in Gaza, where more than 34,000 civilians are dead, most others displaced, children are starving, and the humanitarian support obstructed. And the perception is that we care less.
And he admitted that Europe is deeply hypocritical in the UN Security Council, criticizing Russia for violating resolutions, but saying nothing as Israel constantly violates resolutions.
United Nations Security Council resolutions are violated, as it is the case by Israel with respect to settlements, or when it's being violated by Russia. Yes, the principles that we put in place after the World War are a pillar of peace, but this requires that we are coherent in our language. If we call something a war crime in one place, we need to call it by the same name when it happens anywhere else.
Right, and that's what they do. They point the finger at everybody else, calling everybody else savages, criminals, terrorists. All right, but again, this is the fulfillment of their own tongue. All right, Psalm 64. Right? Psalm 64 and 8. So shall they make their own tongue to fall upon themselves. All that see them shall flee away, and all men shall fear and declare the work of the Lord, for they shall wisely consider his doing. The righteous shall be glad in the Lord, and shall trust in him, and all the upright in heart shall glory as this man falls, as this system corrodes, all right, as ultimately, all right, they get more and more divided, all right, and as they're divided, they're getting ready to try to, roll out this digital ID system, this central bank digital currency, digital money system, all right, this MOTB system, and they don't agree, okay? The elites don't agree, all right? They're all broke up. They're all over the place, okay? Which is ultimately a doing of the Lord, all right? As a nation divided, all right, as the scriptures say, a nation divided let's get that in the book of Matthew 25 and 12 and 25. Matthew 12 and 25. And Yahweh Shai knew their thoughts and said unto them, every kingdom divided against itself is brought into desolation. Every city or house divided against itself shall not stand. And if Satan cast out Satan, he is divided against himself. How then can his kingdom stand? And we're witnessing that right here. Okay?
And we all agree that Hamas sparked this new cycle of violence with their atrocious attacks that we have to condemn once and again. But what has happened in Gaza after 6 months is another horror. And one horror cannot justify another.
So as you can see, the small hats in the West, all right, ultimately, even other devils are saying, okay, enough is enough. All right, we've done enough for these people. We've there's no way to even it's no way to defend what's going on. Okay, so even the devil is having to call out the devil, right?
This is more and more what our societies are feeling as the passionate debates and the many demonstrations around the world, and in particular in the US, are showing.
The EU foreign policy chief likewise acknowledged that the West is very hypocritical on climate change. He admitted that Europe and also North America have been responsible for the majority of carbon emissions throughout history. And meanwhile, countries in the global south, like in Latin America and sub-Saharan Africa, are only responsible for a tiny percentage of carbon emissions historically. And yet the Western powers are trying to put the burden on the global south for the green transition away from fossil fuels, despite the fact that they're not responsible, and despite the fact that the global south is already disproportionately suffering from the consequences of climate change that was caused by the wealthy colonizing capitalist countries in the global north. Here is this very revealing clip as well.
And then we have to have a look at why the world is feeling some resentment about us. Yes, there is a feeling of resentment because people believe that there are different responsibilities. Let me cite only two of them. First, climate change. We Europeans, we have produced about 25% of all cumulated global CO2 emissions since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Africa, 3%. Latin America, 3%. Sub-Saharan Africa and South Americans, almost nothing of the responsibility, and they shared the most important and damaging consequences. So when we talk about fighting climate change, we have to understand their views and the feeling that this is a problem that someone has created and others pay the consequences. And the only possible answer is to provide more resources in order to face this problem. More resources. But it has not been the case.
Now, it is very refreshing to hear a Western official speak so honestly, but we should not kid ourselves. Josep Borrell is definitely not an angel. In fact, on the contrary, he has been a pretty horrible foreign policy chief for the European Union. He was appointed in 2019 for a 5-year term. So at the end of 2024, he will be finishing his term. And in these years, he oversaw the proxy war in Ukraine. And in the same speech, he called for sending more and more weapons to Ukraine. And in fact, in another very revealing comment, he acknowledged that if it were not for Western support, the war in Ukraine would end just in a few months because Ukraine cannot fight without Western military support and weapons. Here is a very revealing clip in which he acknowledges that the Western powers are responsible for fueling this war, and he insists that they must continue sending more weapons to Ukraine because they cannot allow Russia to win. So essentially, they're willing to fight to the last Ukrainian. Listen here.
The Ukrainian existence depends on us. I know how to finish the war in Ukraine. I can finish the war in Ukraine in a couple of weeks, just by cutting the supply. If I cut the supply of arms to Ukraine, Ukraine cannot resist. They will have to surrender, and the war will finish. But is this the way we want the war finished? I don't want. And I hope that many people around Europe doesn't want neither. By the contrary, we will do whatever we can in order to provide the Ukrainians with the military and political support.
So Josep Borrell is by no means an anti-war activist or a peace supporter. He very much is a European imperialist, but he's an interesting politician because over the past few years, he has had a few moments in which he spoke very bluntly, very honestly about reality. In February 2024, Borrell published an article that was shockingly blatant in which he acknowledged that, quote, the era of Western dominance has indeed definitively ended. He warned that the Western powers have been trying to divide the world into, quote, the West against the rest. And he acknowledged that, quote, many in the global South accuse us of double standards. I did a video and a report about that, which I will.
So many people, many countries around the world, all right, are turning an evil eye, towards the beast system, all right. But as you can see, this top official, all right, one of many, all right, is ultimately understanding that it is the West, all right, Babylon the Great in Israel, that is the true problem. So as you can see here again, Revelation 17 and 17, all right, 16, and the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore, and shall make her desolate, all right, and naked, and shall eat her flesh and burn it with fire. Meaning they're going to be used along with Russia and all of these various different nations, all right, to shoot missiles not only on Israel, all right, but they're ultimately going to aid in the destruction of Babylon the Great. And we see that division happening right before our very eyes. This is why we go into these things. Okay, it may be boring to you, but to us, this is biblical prophecy speaking right before our very eyes.
To in the description below. In fact, in the speech that Borrell delivered at Oxford University, which I began this analysis today by looking at, in that speech, he made another very similar remark. He acknowledged that the United States has lost its status as the global hegemon.
I see the international system that we were accustomed to after the Cold War no longer exists. America has lost its status of a hegemon.
And he conceded that China's rise has fundamentally reshaped the global economy. And today, China represents nearly 20% of the world's economy when its GDP is measured at purchasing power parity, whereas the US only represents around 14%, and the European Union represents under 16%. And this is a massive shift from just 30 years ago when China only made up 5% of the global economy and the US and the EU each represented around 20% of world GDP. Here is this clip from the EU foreign policy chief.
I see, as you know, China rising to the superpower status. What China has done in the last 40 years is a unique in the history of mankind. In the last 30 years, China's share of the world GDP at PPP has gone from 6% to almost 20%, while we Europeans, we went from 21 to 14%, and the US from 20 to 15. This is a dramatic change on the economic landscape. And China is becoming a rival for us and for the US, not just in manufacturing cheap goods, but also as a military power, as the forefront of technological development, and building the technologies that will shape our future. China has embarked in a friendship without limits, although all friendships has limits, with Russia, which signals a growing alignment of the authoritarian regimes in front of democracies.
In that same speech at Oxford, the EU foreign policy chief acknowledged that the world is becoming more and more multipolar as Western hegemony has declined. And in particular, he discussed the BRICS countries and how they refuse to simply pick a side in the new Cold War that the West is waging, trying to divide the world into blocks. Instead, countries like Brazil, India, South Africa, Turkey, they are refusing to simply pick a side, and they are maintaining a non-aligned foreign policy and maximizing their autonomy, as he said.
I said the world is much more multipolar. Yes, that's true. Middle powers, India, Brazil, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, Turkey, are emerging. They become important actors. Whether
and who are they siding with? ultimately Russia is at the forefront of that alliance, which speaks to Ezekiel the 38th chapter, which speaks to end time prophecy. So all of these different nations, and including these EU countries that we're listening to, some of them are going to side with that very alliance to come up against Israel in the West. This is what this is all leading to. Okay? Very important.
They are BRICS or not BRICS. They have very few common futures, except the desire of getting more status and a stronger voice in the world, as well as a greater benefit for their own development. And in order to achieve this, they are maximizing their autonomy, not willing to take side, hedging one side or the other.
In another...
So the West no longer has the influence that it used to have. You know, after the USSR disbanded, you know, NATO was a powerhouse, you know, along with the EU, America. They you know, they were able to dominate. All right. But now Russia is becoming, all right, pursuing the biblical prophecy. They're putting them hooks are being put in Russia's jaw. All right. And they're ultimately formulating their own beast system. All right. And China is up in there. Okay. So what do you think these nations are going to do? All right. They're going to do, all right, what works best for them. All right. But it's all ultimately going to turn bad. All right. For the small hats and for the West. All right. We can see all of these things being formulated. Let's keep going.
A very revealing comment that Borrell made back in 2022. He pushed back against this idea that has been promoted by US President Joe Biden that the new Cold War that the US is leading against China and Russia is a so-called battle between democracy and autocracy. And the EU foreign policy chief admitted in this rare moment of honesty that in reality, that there are many autocratic authoritarian regimes on the West side. The West has many authoritarian allies. It is not a battle between so-called democracy and autocracy.
This will coexist with a broader democracies versus authoritarians, a big divide. I wouldn't insist a lot on it, because in our side, there are a lot of authoritarian regimes. We cannot say we are the democracies and the ones who follow us are also democracy. That's not true. That's not true.
In yet another revealing speech in 2022, Josep Borrell acknowledged that the West's prosperity in the neoliberal era and the era of US-dominated hegemony after the overthrow of the Soviet Union and the end of the First Cold War in the 1990s and 2000s. He acknowledged that in that era, the West's prosperity was based on China and Russia. Cheap consumer goods from China and the big Chinese market for Western exports, and also cheap energy, gas, and commodities from Russia. Here's yet another example of one of these revealing quotes from Josep Borrell.
So our prosperity was based on China and Russia. Energy, a market. US takes care of our security. You, China, and Russia provide the basis of our prosperity. This is a world that is no longer there. I think that Europeans were facing a situation in which we suffer the consequences of a process that has been lasting for years, in which we have decoupled the sources of our prosperity from the sources of our security. This is a sentence to provide a headline. And I'm taking that from Oliver Smith, who has been developing this thesis, I think, quite well. Our prosperity has been based on cheap energy coming from Russia, Russian gas, cheap and suppose affordable and secure and stable, which has been proved not the case, and the access to the big China market for exports and imports, for technological transfer, for investment, and for having cheap goods. I think that the Chinese workers with their low salaries has done much better and much more to contain inflation than all the central banks together. So our prosperity was based on China and Russia. Energy, a market.
But like I said earlier, Borrell has in many ways been an awful foreign policy chief for the EU, because although he has said some of these very honest comments every now and then, he has also been blatantly racist and made other frank comments in which he revealed that many elites in Brussels and in the European Union overall, they see themselves as superior to the rest of the world. They think that the rest of the world consists of barbarians. And in a very racist rant in 2022, Josep Borrell claimed that Europe is an enlightened garden and the rest of the world is a jungle, and that Europe had to protect itself from the barbarians in the rest of the world in the jungle. Now, this is, of course, incredibly hypocritical because, as I began this analysis today showing, he admits that Europe is deeply hypocritical. It constantly violates international law. It allows its allies, like Israel, to violate international law when it's convenient and to commit war crimes. So in reality, Europe is just as much a jungle, if not more of a jungle, and the US is constantly waging wars around the world, overthrowing foreign governments with the support of European countries. So if anything, they're the barbarians in the jungle. But like I said, Josep Borrell, he's not an anti-imperialist by any stretch of the imagination. He is an imperialist. He is a warmonger, but he is one of these politicians, like Donald Trump, who every now and then admits something. He says the quiet part loud when most politicians know, they're smart enough to know they shouldn't say these kinds of things. Now, in the other speech at Oxford
And the Lord just has a spirit on them because we're in the time of them breaking up.
University in 2024, Borrell basically repeated this argument, and we can see an example of European exceptionalism. We know about American exceptionalism. Well, here is another example of very arrogant European exceptionalism in which Borrell claims that the European Union has created the best quality of life, the best social system ever in humanity.
Europe, the European Union, but more than the European Union, the way of living of the Europeans, this best combination of political freedom, economic prosperity, and social cohesion that humanity has never been able to invent is certainly in danger. And in the meantime, to continue fighting to make the values and principles that make Europe what it is, I said at the beginning, the best combination of political freedom, economic prosperity, and social cohesion that humanity has never been able to invent.
So as I wrap up, I just want to once again reiterate that Borrell has been quite reprehensible as an EU foreign policy chief, but I think it's very important and useful to look at some of these speeches that are given by European elites when they're speaking to fellow elites at universities like Oxford, because we can see what they actually say behind closed doors. He knew this was being recorded. He knew that the speech would be published. So I really want to hear what they say when they know they're not being republished and they're not being recorded. But again, we can, I think, learn a lot from listening to these comments that are made by European elites to see how they actually see the world. And we can understand that this very arrogant, imperialist, neo-colonialist view of the world is very much still alive. But they lament the fact that Western hegemony is in decline, which explains this very aggressive foreign policy against Russia, against China, against other countries, because the Western powers are desperately trying to grasp on to their declining hegemony. But as we discuss here at Geopolitical Economy Report.
All right. So, and I wanted to play that whole video because I thought it was good. But again, we always go to Daniel, the 2nd chapter, right? So the revival of Rome, all right, is on its way out. Okay, and the Lord is destroying the system from inside out. As a matter of fact, let's get the book of Obadiah real quick. Okay. And this speaks to, those small hats in the West. Okay. Obadiah, verse 7. All the men of thy confederacy have brought thee even to the border. The men that were at peace with thee have deceived thee and prevailed against thee, and they that eat thy bread, that debt, have laid a wound under thee, and there is none understanding in him. Now this word for confederacy, okay, is bariath, a covenant, an alliance, a pledge, treaty, alliance, constitution, ordinance, agreement, friendship, okay, covenant. So going to Daniel, the 2nd chapter, this vision is speaking, all right, in which the 4th beast, all right, is Rome, all right, is getting ready to be destroyed, all right, leading into the divine kingdom of Yahweh Bashim Yahushua. Okay, Daniel, the 2nd chapter and the 40th verse. In the 4th kingdom, Rome, the 4th beast, shall be as strong as iron, for as much as iron breaketh in pieces and subdueth all things. And as iron breaketh all these, it shall bruise and break in pieces. And that's what Rome was able to do. All right. And we know that the Western Roman Empire fell. All right. But as it says in the book of Revelation, the 13th chapter. Okay. Revelation 13:2, and I saw one of his heads as it were wounded unto death, the Western Roman Empire, and his deadly wound was healed. All right. And all the world wondered after the beast. And they worshiped the dragon, which gave power unto the beast. All right. But basically, this system has everyone worshiping, all right, Roman thought, all right, Roman politics, all right, Roman sports, all right, Greco-Roman, that is, but Rome is what gave them their seat and authority. All right, you are worshiping, all right, and living in a modern day Roman system, all right, here in Babylon Great. And then you have its vassals, all right, which are fulfilled in the NATO and the EU, okay, which makes this a beast system, all right, and they worship the dragon, all right, the Roman Empire, the Roman system, which gave power unto the beast system, and they worship the beast, saying, who is like unto the beast, who was able to make war with him? So ultimately, people look at this system and its great military might, and through these great alliances and agreements and, you know, covenants that they have, but the Lord is breaking those covenants up. So as the deadly wound has been healed from the Renaissance period until now, let's get the book of Malachi, right? All right. Malachi verse 1 and 3. And I hated Esau and laid his mountains and his heritage waste for the dragons of the wilderness. All right. This is ultimately what's getting ready to happen to Babylon the Great, Esau's inheritance. Whereas Edom saith, we are impoverished, all right, but we will return and build the desolate places. And ultimately, they returned and rebuilt the ancient Roman Empire. Okay. It says, we will return and build the desolate places. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, they shall build, all right, but I will throw down. They shall call themselves the border of wickedness. So they have rebuilt, all right, you know, what was, what fell from the Renaissance till now. They've rebuilt the ancient Roman Empire. All right. So at one point they were desolate. Okay. But they've been able to rebuild, all right, to fulfill the prophecy of Esau, Edom ruling the world with the sword. All right. But the Lord is getting ready to throw down everything that they've rebuilt. They've rebuilt the desolate places. They've rebuilt the Western Roman Empire. All right. And that's what all of what we see speaks to as far as America, NATO, EU. Okay. Now, going back, okay, rebuild, rebirth, Renaissance. Daniel 2 and 4. All right. Whereas thou sawest the feet and the toes, part potter's clay and part iron, which is the revival of Rome, the revival of the fourth beast, the little horn, which leads to our Lord and Savior, Yahweh Shai, returning to the earth. He is going to return, all right, to this system. All right. The end of the vision is the toes, those big hard ass toes of this image that Nebuchadnezzar saw in his dream. All right. And whereas thou sawest the feet and the toes and part potter's clay and part iron, the kingdom shall be divided, but there shall be in it the strength of the iron, for as much as thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay. All right. So the kingdom is divided. Okay. They still have the strength of the sword, but the sword is divided. All right. But economically, all right, politically, financially, how they're going to move forward with this MOTB system. All right. They don't agree, especially with how the West in Israel is moving, messing up the money, messing up alliances that they need in order for Europe to be great. Okay. The way that the EU, the way that the small hats in America move, all right, ultimately are putting a strain. All right. And many people are seeing that the EU is aiding them in all of this wickedness. Okay. And whereas the toes of the feet, all right, in this vision were part iron and part clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. So Satan is divided against Satan. And whereas thou sawest the iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, going throughout the four corners of the earth, setting up economic hitmen, all right, ultimately putting their rulers in charge of certain regions of the earth, all right, overthrowing strongholds, overthrowing governments, all right, waging war, as the scriptures say. This is what they've done. All right, but through marriages and certain agreements, they've been able, all right, to pretty much get themselves up in there. All right. Psalms 58. Okay. And 2, yea, in heart you work wickedness, you weigh the violence of your hands in the earth. Okay. No, you plot injustice in your hearts and you spread violence throughout the land. Let's get the book of Habakkuk, the first chapter, which speaks to the Chaldeans, but is also speaking, all right, to Esau, Edom. Habakkuk 1 and 10. And they shall scoff at kings, and the princes shall be a scorn unto them. They shall deride every stronghold, for they shall heap dust and take it. All right. And that's what they've done. They've scoffed at kings. They've derided strongholds. Okay. Then shall his mind change, and he shall pass over and offend, imputing his power unto his God. And his God is Satan. See? And ultimately the Lord is putting the spirit on him, all right, to do things necessary to get us to the kingdom, man. Okay, so they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. So they've made all of these covenants. They set up all of these deals, all right, but in the end, they shall not cleave, debak, all right, cling, stick together, follow closely, cling, be joined together. So they're not going to be joined together. They're going to overtake one another. And these are just words. Eventually, all of these things are going to turn physical. And in the days of these kings, while all of this is broken up, when all of this is getting ready to be destroyed, the God of heaven shall set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms. It shall stand forever, including Russia. All right? So hopefully I'll edify on to the next. Shalom.